Hungarian Folk Tales. The Prince Who Turned into Stone. Once upon a time, there lived an old king who had two fine sons. One day they stood before their father and they said it was time for them to go and see the world and the seven seas. The old king was sad, but as there was nothing he could do, he filled their pockets with gold and bade them farewell. The boys said goodbye and off they went. They kept walking for a long time until they finally reached a strange new town. When they arrived, the people of the town were having a fair. They were selling beautiful bouquets of flowers and each prince bought one for himself. They tied a red ribbon around one and a green around the other, and they went on their way. Suddenly they came upon a man with a huge beard. "Which way are you going, old man?" "I would like to sell these animals here," he said, "if only there was someone to buy them." The two princes felt very sorry for the old man, and since they liked the animals anyway, they finally bought them. And so they kept marching forward until they came to a fork in the road. Finally the younger one said, "It's your turn to choose, brother. I will take the black road." "All right, but let me tell you what. See this walnut tree by the roadside? Let's both tie our bouquets on a branch. When one of us gets back here and sees that the flowers of the other one have wilted and withered, he should know that his brother is dead." They did so and went their separate ways. The older brother kept going until he arrived in a town. The place was all covered in black drapes. The prince went into an inn and asked the innkeeper why they were in mourning. The innkeeper explained that there was a foreign knight who said that the king should give him the country and his daughter unless he was defeated by one of the king's men. Many young warriors responded to the challenge, but they were all slain, including the two sons of the king. Our prince challenged the foreign knight the next morning, and he was so quick and clever with a sword that the foreign knight was killed in an instant. There was celebration and joy in the town. The king took the prince to his palace and promised him the hand of his daughter, plus the country, once he died. And they lived happily without a care in the world. One day the king said, "I would love to eat some wild boar." "I'll be happy to get you some if that's what you want." The prince mounted his horse and rode out to the forest, taking the animals with him. He was busy trying to find a wild boar, but finally night fell. He settled down and made a fire to keep himself warm. Suddenly he heard a voice calling from the tree above. "I'm cold. I'm freezing." "If you're so cold, why don't you come down? I have a fire burning down here. This should warm you up." As he looked up, he spotted an incredibly old woman among the branches. "I would never dare to descend. I'm frightened of the beasts," she croaked. "I will throw down a twig, hit all of them with it, then I know they won't hurt me anymore." The prince did as he was told, and all of a sudden, all three animals turned into stone. The old hag jumped down from the tree, seized the twig from the young man, and hit him too. The prince immediately turned to stone himself. They were all waiting for the prince to return home, but it was in vain. 1 month went by, and during that time the younger prince visited the town of Joy and returned to the large walnut tree. He saw that his brother's bouquet was wilted and dry. He walked down the road until he got to the town. He found the same inn that his brother visited before him. The innkeeper was very happy to see him. "Thank heavens, the prince is back." "Hey, good man, I'm not the one I seem to be," said the younger prince. "The man before me was probably my brother. I am trying to find him myself." When he spoke to the old king, he told him that his beloved son-in-law went to the forest and no one had seen him since. "I shall not rest until I find him," said the younger prince. Finally, he himself was lost just like his brother. When darkness fell, he lit a fire to keep himself warm, and his animals also stretched out for a rest. Suddenly, he heard a wailing from above his head. "I am cold, I am freezing." "If you're so cold, why don't you come down?" he said. "I have a fire burning down here. This should warm you up." "But I'm afraid of the beasts. I will throw down a twig, hit all 3 of them with it, and then I'll know they won't hurt me anymore." Maybe this old witch killed his brother. Instead of touching the animals, he only stroked the dirt with a twig. And when the old hag jumped down from the tree, she was attacked by the wild beasts. "What have you done with my brother? Where is he?" "The large stone behind you is your brother, and the 3 flat ones are the animals. Swish them with the twig, your touch will revive them." The prince did as he was told. His brother told him everything. Finally, he returned to the witch. "Good deeds are rewarded by good in return, but evil deeds shall be punished. Now it is your turn to turn to stone, lest you should harm another soul." The old witch turned into stone and never left the forest again. She is still there to this very day. Where? Somewhere on this side of here and the far side of there, where a little pig snorts the air. Hungarian Folk Tales. Cerceruszka. Once upon a time, there lived a widower who had 2 daughters. His next-door neighbour was a widow who never stopped recommending herself to the man. "Hey, neighbour, take me for your wife. You won't regret it. I will bring up your 2 daughters, and I'll be like a real mother to them." One day, the poor man finally gave in and married the widow next door. But it did not take long for the woman to start treating the girls badly. She tried everything to get them away from the house. She nagged her husband, "Take them both to the forest and just leave them there. Let them perish." That was something horrible for the father's ears, but still, he did as the woman wanted him to. Cerceruszka, that was the name of the elder girl, heard what her father and stepmother were about to do. So she filled her pockets with grain, so she would leave a trail behind. Early next morning, the father took out his 2 daughters. Cerceruszka just kept spilling the grain from her pockets all along the way. When they were deep in the middle of the forest, their father told them, "Well, my girls, I think it's about time to take a rest, because we are all very tired." And the girls went to sleep. When the girls woke up, they started calling their father, but he was already far, far away. "Don't you worry, little sister. We will trace our way back along the grain that I spilled as we came this way." But they couldn't find the grain because the birds had pecked it all up, and the girls just couldn't find their way home. On top of all of that, their stepmother had cursed them before they left. "If you drink from the track of an animal, you are going to change into that animal." As they were walking in the endless forest, the younger girl became thirsty. She spotted the footprint of a cow that was full of clean water. "Sister, oh dear sister, I'm so thirsty, I have to drink." "Don't drink, sister, because you will turn into an animal." A little later, the little girl got left behind and she drank from the footprint of a deer. When Cerceruszka looked back, she saw the little deer running after her. Cerceruszka kept on going forward with the deer following her until she finally found a hollow tree. There she gathered up some dry leaves and made a comfortable bed. One day a young prince was hunting in the forest and he spotted the beautiful Cerceruszka. The prince called after them, "Come on out, you beautiful girl." "I cannot, because I have a dear sister and you want to kill her." "Come on out with the deer. I won't touch her." So Cerceruszka finally came out, and she was so beautiful that the prince was lost for words. When he found his voice again, he immediately asked her to marry him. "Let's get married. I'll be yours and you'll be mine, and we'll live happily forever and a day." He kissed her and embraced her, Then they both got on his horse, and the prince married the girl. Time passed by. The king was on a hunt one day when Tsetserushka gave birth to a son. His name was Little King Andriku. Before I forget what I was going to say, I wanted to tell you that there lived a mean cook in the court who had an ugly daughter. She had always dreamt that her own daughter would be the queen one day, so it was no surprise that she hated Tsetserushka. "Your Majesty, you are so beautiful. There is a pond in the garden. You should go and take a look at yourself." When they walked around the water, the cook suddenly shoved her into the pond. When this was done, the cook woman quickly changed her own daughter's dress and made her lay down in Tsetserushka's bed. Soon the king returned from the hunt. The evil cook told him the good news. "You have a son. His name is Little King Andriku. Just take a look, Your Majesty." The king was very happy and he kissed the baby boy. He was about to kiss his wife, but he was horrified at what he saw. "Oh my goodness, what became of my wife? How could she become as ugly as this?" "It was childbirth that did it to her," explained the cook. The king was sad, but since there was nothing he could do, he finally accepted the change. Each night, Tsetserushka came back and visited the deer in her room. She kept asking, "Is Little King Andriku crying?" "Of course he is, dear sister. Barren women have no milk." One day the cook's daughter heard this. She was determined to get rid of the deer before it caused her downfall. So she said to the king, "Darling husband, I'm feeling very weak. I will feel no better until I can eat the heart and liver of this little deer." The deer must be killed. As they were sharpening the knife and washing the bowl for her blood, the deer ran out to the pond and called out, "My darling Tsetserushka, get up from the depths, from the stomach of the big fish, because they want to cut my throat with a knife. They want to catch my blood in a bowl. They want to kill me too." Then Tsetserushka stepped out of the pond, walked up to the deer, and stroked her gently. She was even more beautiful than before. The king heard and saw everything because he was secretly following the deer. He embraced and kissed Tsetserushka, who told him everything. The king immediately went to see the cook. He said to the cook, "What would you do to the person who would not hesitate to destroy my wife?" "What? I would have the person tied to a horse's tail and have him dragged through the town." And the old woman and her daughter were treated exactly as the old hag had predicted. The king took Tsetserushka and the little deer back to the palace, and they all lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Little Cockroll and the Hedge. Once upon a time, a little cockerel went out under the hedge to scratch around. He scratched and scratched around until the hedge was uprooted. Along came a magpie and asked the uprooted hedge, "Now what's the matter with you, hedge? Only yesterday you were standing here all healthy and strong." "Dear me, brother magpie," replied the hedge, "the little cockerel came out to scratch around under me, and now I'm uprooted." "Well then, I'll pull out my fine tail," said the magpie, and he pulled out his own tail feathers just like that. Off he flew to a walnut tree. The walnut tree was astonished at how scruffy the magpie looked. So the walnut tree asked, "What's happened to you, brother magpie? Only yesterday you had a fine tail, and now you are all scruffy." "Dear me, brother tree," answered the magpie, "the little cockerel went out to scratch around under the hedge was uprooted, and I pulled out my fine tail." "Well then, I'll clip off my fine twigs," said the walnut tree, and he clipped off his twigs just like that. Around noon came a deer to rest under the walnut tree out of the great heat. She could see that the walnut tree was now completely bald. "What happened to you, walnut tree? Only yesterday you were green and flourishing. Now today you're all bald." "Dear me, sister dear," answered the walnut tree. "The little cockerel went out this morning to scratch around under the hedge. The hedge was uprooted, the magpie pulled out its fine tail feather, and I clipped off all my twigs." "Well then, I'll chase away my 2 fine sons," said the deer, and she sent them both away just like that, for which she grieved and grieved. When she felt thirsty, she went to the well for a drink. Now the well was astonished to see the deer appear alone, because she always brought her 2 fine sons with her. So the well asked, "How is it you are on your own today, sister dear? Where have you left your 2 fine sons?" "Dear me, brother well," said the deer, "the little cockerel went out this morning to scratch around under the hedge. The hedge was uprooted, the magpie pulled out its fine tail, the walnut tree clipped off all his twigs, and I sent my 2 fine sons away." "Well then, I'll turn my fine wine into blood," said the well. And so he did. Now when Sarah, the serving girl, went to the well with her pail, she asked the well, "What's this, well? How is it today that you're full of blood instead of your sweet water?" "Dear me, Sarah," said the well, "the little cockerel went out this morning to scratch around under the hedge. The hedge was uprooted, the magpie pulled out his fine tail, the walnut tree clipped off all his twigs, the deer sent her 2 fine sons away, and the water in me has turned to blood. Well then, I'll beat my own head with this pail." And so she did, and off she went with a swollen, battered head back to her mistress. Her mistress asked, "What happened to you, Sarah?" "Dear me, mistress," said Sarah, "the little cockerel went out this morning to scratch around under the hedge. The hedge was uprooted, the magpie pulled out his fine tail, the walnut tree clipped off all his twigs, the deer sent her 2 fine sons away, the water in the well turned to blood, and I beat my own head with the pail. Well then, I'll spread my dough all over the wall." It was just ready for kneading, but she went ahead and spread it all over the wall. Now when the master of the house came home that evening, he saw that the dough was spread all over the wall. "Have you gone mad or what, dear wife, that you spread the dough all over the wall?" "Dear me, husband, the little cockerel went out this morning to scratch around under the hedge. The hedge was uprooted, the magpie pulled out his fine tail, the walnut tree clipped off all his twigs, the deer sent her 2 fine sons away, the water in the well turned to blood, Sarah beat her own head with a pail, and I spread the dough all over the wall. Well then, I'll shave off my fine beard." And he shaved it off just like that. Not long later, the son of the house came home and saw his father with a face like a plucked chicken. He asked, "What happened to you, father dear?" "Son, there's been nothing but trouble here all day. The little cockerel went out this morning to scratch around under the hedge. The hedge was uprooted, the magpie pulled out his fine tail, the walnut tree clipped off all his twigs, the deer sent her 2 fine sons away, the water in the well turned to blood, Sarah beat her own head with a pail, your mother spread the dough all over the wall, and I went and shaved off my fine beard." "Fair enough," said the lad. "I'll go out and cut off the legs of our 4 oxen." With that, he picked up his axe, went to the byre, and straight away cut off a foreleg of one of the oxen. He was just about to take the axe to another when a soldier just happened to arrive and cried to him, "Have you lost your mind, my lad? What are you doing to that ox?" "Dear me, soldier, sir. The little cockerel went out this morning to scratch around under the hedge. The hedge was uprooted, the magpie pulled out his fine tail, the walnut tree clipped off all his twigs, the deer sent her 2 fine sons away, the water in the well turned to blood, Sarah beat her own head with a pail, my mother spread the dough all over the wall, my father shaved off his fine beard completely, and now I'm cutting off the legs of our 4 oxen." "Only when the moon turns green," shouted the soldier, and gave the lad such a beating with the flat of his sword that it was all he could do to stagger back into the house. The soldier drove the oxen off to the fair and sold them. With his time served as a soldier, he was free to marry, and from the oxen prize he threw a great feast of a wedding, and they all lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Poor Man and His Fiddle. Far, far away, beyond the high mountain and across the vast ocean, there lived a king who had 3 beautiful daughters. One day the queen said to the 3 daughters, "Off you go, girls, to the forest to pick wild berries, and whoever picks the most will have my red skirt." So off they went, and they picked and picked berries as fast as they could. When noon was near and the sun high, they settled down in the shade of a tree and looked to see which of them had gathered the most. Now the youngest had picked more than her 2 sisters together. The 2 turned green with envy. The youngest sister would have the red skirt. So the eldest of the 3 had this to say, "Girls, girls, come and pick some more, for we cannot go home with so few berries." The youngest argued and argued, for if they went on picking and picking, they would never be home before evening. But her 2 elder sisters insisted that they stay in the forest. And so it passed. Off went the 2 into one part of the forest, the youngest to another. But not to pick berries, for they agreed to kill their younger sister. If they could not have the red skirt, then their sister should not have it either. So they set off after her and took hold of her. She begged and pleaded in vain and offered them all the berries she had, but they killed her. Just when they had taken her life, a blind beggar arrived with his fiddle and bow. The sisters took the fiddle off the old beggar, placed their dead sister inside it, and hid the fiddle in a hole in a tree. Home went the girls and were asked where their sister was. Of course they didn't know. They warned her again and again not to stray into the forest, but she didn't heed them. Who knew? She may have lost her way or even been killed by robbers who live in the forest. In the meantime, a poor man went off to the forest to cut himself some timber. He chopped down the very tree in which the body of the little princess had been placed. The poor man was astonished to see a fiddle spring out of the tree. He took the fiddle into his hands and started to draw the bow on the fiddle, across and up, just like the gypsies did. Now this fiddle was a fiddle that did not just make music, it sang as well. Draw the bow, good and slow, my good fellow, my good fellow. Harm it not, for the fiddle is me. The fiddle you play is Princess Betty. Goodness me, thought the poor man. This fiddle must have a spell on it. Now's my chance to seek my fortune, for a fortune it will be if someone pays to hear this wonderful song. Off set the poor man to wander the whole wide world and earn so much money that an entire cart could hardly suffice to carry it after him. On his travels, he came to the town of the king, whose youngest daughter met a death so cruel. He stopped outside the king's palace and began to play his fiddle. The king heard the wonderful melody and asked a servant to order the fiddler into his palace. The servant ran out and delivered the message, but the musician replied that not one step would he take, for he had more money than the king himself. Back ran the servant to report what the musician had said. There was nothing for it. The king himself stepped out and invited the musician into his palace to play for him. So often did he ask that the musician went in, tapped on the fiddle twice, and started to draw the bow. Draw the bow, good and slow, my good fellow, my good fellow. Harm it not, for the fiddle is me, the fiddle you play is Princess Betty. The king had this to say, a wonder of a song, a wonder. The 2 princesses were standing by and gaping at the song. One of them took the fiddle and started to play it to see what it would sing for her. Draw the bow, good and slow. You killed me, but no one knows. The other princess took up the fiddle and it sang the very same for her. Then the king took up the fiddle and the fiddle had this to sing for him. Draw your bow good and slow, Princess Betty loves you so. This is witchcraft for sure. Let me try the fiddle too, said the Queen. So she took up the fiddle and started to play, and the fiddle had this to sing for her. Draw the bow good and slow, Mother dear, Mother dear. Harm it not, for the fiddle is me, Princess Betty is here, you see. And at that very moment, the fiddle opened up and out jumped the little princess, as alive and as beautiful as a spring flower. The two elder sisters fainted away in fear. The King and Queen wept tears of joy for the daughter they had lost and mourned, but had now returned in such a miraculous way. Now that the cruelty of the two elder sisters had come to light, the King locked them up in a tower, there to stay until death took them away. But the little princess begged and pleaded her father until the King relented and had mercy on the two. And from then on, they all lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Fairy from the Oak Tree. Once upon a time, many years ago, there lived the son of the Green King. Now, since he was all alone in the palace, he was bored, and so he picked up his gun and set off hunting. When he came into the forest, he spied a little rabbit, took aim, and was about to shoot. "Excuse me, young prince, one good deed deserves another. Spare me my life." And so he spared the rabbit's life and went further into the forest while the rabbit scampered away. Then he came upon a fox, and the fox said to him, "Don't shoot, young prince. Spare me, and your good deed will deserve another." So the prince spared his life too and went further into the forest. There he found a deer, and the deer also spoke to him, "Spare me my life, and good fortune will bless you." Off you go to the centre of the forest. There you will find an oak tree with 3 branches. Lop off one of the branches, and out will come a fairy. But take some water with you, for she will probably have need of that. So off he went, and he came upon the oak tree, and he lopped off a branch, and a beautiful fairy appeared. "Water, water, please. I need water." The young prince dashed to help, but dropped his flask, and all the water spilled out. The poor fairy died there and then. All he could do was to take her in his arms and carry her home and bury her. Time passed, and the prince set off hunting again, and he came upon the fox. "Now then, kind young prince, for your good deed I'll tell you something good. Go into the forest, cut off another branch of that oak, but bring water with you because you may have need of it." The prince had a flask of wine with him, and he thought that the wine would do. He lopped off the branch. Out came the beautiful fairy. He gave her some wine, but still she went and died. So he picked her up and carried her home in great sorrow and buried her. After mourning her for a while, he once again set off into the forest to go hunting, and he came upon the little rabbit. "Now then, kind young prince, for your good deed I'll tell you something good, but come with me and I'll show you a spring of running water." Then they came upon the oak. "Now lop off that branch." And once again a beautiful fairy came out of the branch and cried, "Water, water, I need water." The little rabbit took the beaker, gave it to the fairy, who drank deep from it, and this time did not die. She then knelt before the young prince and thanked him for freeing her from the oak tree. They embraced and kissed. So now all 3 of them set off home. On their way to the palace, they came to a well and sat down beside it. There the fairy spoke. "I dare not go into your palace wearing fairy clothes. Please go home and fetch me some new robes." Now there was a willow there, and she climbed up into it, and a witch arrived to draw water. She glanced into the well and saw a beautiful fairy. She gazed and gazed but couldn't see anyone in the water. Finally, she saw the fairy up in the tree. She called out to her and asked her what she was doing up in the tree. The fairy explained everything to the witch. And what did the witch do but seize hold of the fairy and throw her into the well, and the fairy changed into a beautiful golden fish. Then the witch set off home and fetched her own daughter to the well and made her climb up into the tree. Soon the prince came back carrying clothes. He saw the little rabbit and asked him where the girl was. I went home to have a bite and a sup, and when I came back, she was up in the tree. So the prince looked around and, right enough, there was a girl in the tree. Down you come and put these clothes on. And when she came down from the tree, he saw her face, and it was ugly now, when before it had been so beautiful. Oh, dear prince, I was struck by the rays of the sun, and they changed my face. So the young prince went ahead and gave her the clothes to change into, because he thought she was the fairy. And he took her back home to the palace. One day the witch came to see her daughter, and when she was there she said, I went by the well, and there I saw in the water a fine golden fish. Now what you have to do is pretend to be ill and tell the prince that the only thing that will cure you is if you have the golden fish caught. The prince would do anything for his princess. So the golden fish was caught and cooked, and she ate some and was cured. A single scale fell from the fish to the ground, and out of it there grew a beautiful golden apple tree, which burst into flower every evening and grew apples by noon the next day, which the fairies came for in the evening. Once again the witch went to see her daughter. What's going on here? You'll have to have that tree cut down, or else they'll know that you're not the fairy. So the young queen said to the king, we have no use of that apple tree. Cut it down so that we won't ever see it again. Now nearby lived a poor man, and he was the one who cut the tree down. And when he was chopping it up into logs, a small chip flew off, and he put it in his pocket and took it home with him. The following day, the man, his wife and daughter went off to work for the king. They set off so early that they had no time to sweep the floors or make their beds. But in the evening, when they got home, they found that the house had been swept clean and all the beds were made. And they wondered who could have come to their house. On the next morning, they set off to work again. But they left behind their daughter, who hid herself. What did she see but the fairy pop out of the chip of wood and start sweeping the house? Then the daughter took tight hold of the chip of wood to stop the fairy returning to it. So that was how they caught the fairy. And the two girls went off to work at the king's court. There they took turns in telling stories. The king asked, now tell us another one about what you saw and did in your life. Once upon a time there was a young prince, and one day he went hunting and he met a little rabbit, a fox, and a deer. For I am the fairy who the young prince set free from the oak tree. And the prince embraced his fairy tenderly. He had the witch and her daughter tied to a horse's tail, and the prince and the fairy from the oak tree lived happily ever after.